Hello, hello, hello. Glad to have you with us today, Jana. Excited to talk today about configuring additional nonprofit features and some security concerns. So, as always, your instructors here, Kathy and Melissa. Hope you all know us well by now, have our numbers, and can get with us when you need us. Kathy will have office hours again this week. As always, our classes with all the information is posted on the website that you see there. And today we're going to talk about 3 different main points of interest. So the program management module and what you need to do to configure it to work based on what we've done in past. The V4S, otherwise known as Volunteers for Salesforce, configurations for staff and for volunteers. And then some best practices for data integrity and security, which may be a bit of a review for those of you who are working as a system admin right now. Configuring program management module. So if you remember, we covered a fairly detailed use case for the functionality of the program management module back in part 1, section 3. But today we're going to look at what it actually takes to finish setting that up based on some of those situations. So the required post-installation configurations, which there always are some, right? The sharing rules for program management, although people do use it for project management. Experience Cloud configurations if you're using Experience Cloud, and then some customizable configurations. So we want to take just a quick refresher look at the program management module architecture. And if you remember, it touches the standard objects of account and contact, and then adds these additional objects that are custom objects in that module. So program engagement, service delivery, service session, program cohort, program service, service schedule, and service participant. So a lot of different pieces and parts there. The profiles you should already be familiar with as a Salesforce admin. But when we install the program management module, it added a profile for us called Program Management Standard User. You want to assign that profile to folks who will be specifically using the program management module. Permission sets also come in a variety of levels of access, and you can see those in the pop-out. So deliver, manage, and view. This is just a quick reference guide to those permission sets and what they actually do. So I'm not going to read through them. I know that you can read, and when you have the slide deck in your hand, it's just an easy guide to be able to decide who should get which permission sets, depending on what their role in the program management is. But remember, these permission sets only apply to custom objects that make up the PMM. Other permissions may need to be assigned for standard objects such as accounts, contacts, and cases. And so you may want to clone the permission sets that are there and add the appropriate permissions for accounts, contacts, and cases based on your organization. Next are the sharing rules and settings. Some of my very favorites, and confuses a lot of folks when we do sharing rules and sharing settings. But as a Salesforce administrator, hopefully sharing rules are not a foreign object to you, right? So they are part of any configuration and setup for Salesforce. And the same is true for using sharing rules for the program management module. And the task is really pretty much the same. So our checklist for the program management module looks a little something like this, right? Creating the public group, creating the sharing group, and assigning those, and then saving and repeating to define the sharing rules for all the objects in the program management module. Again, this is where you want to look back at all the work that we did in, I don't know, week 3, I guess, of talking to our customers about how they were going to use the program management module and what considerations they needed there. So this is where all that comes into play. So want to talk quickly about using Experience Cloud. As we've discussed before, Experience Cloud is a certification and a knowledge base unto itself. But many of our customers are using Experience Cloud. There is a template, I believe, that is available for the program management module. There's certainly one for the outbound funds module. And so when you're assigning all those profiles and permission sets, you need to realize that if you're using Experience Cloud, that you'll have to assign permission sets to the Experience Cloud user licenses too. An attendance and service schedule are two components that are actually available in Experience Cloud, and using those sharing rules to further define and refine what your Experience Cloud users see. That's often where your public users interact with the program management module, or leaders of classes or service deliveries to take attendance, to do different work in Experience Cloud. So be sure that you don't forget when you're setting up the permission sets and the profiles, if you're using Experience Cloud, to include those licenses as well. So the program management module is very robust and very flexible, and it can be configured and customized to fit most any program need. But let's take a high-level look at some of the ways that the program management module can work with different cases. One of the cases that we looked at, if you remember, back in week 3, was using the program module to track impact. And it involved recipients who were not individuals or contacts. In fact, one of the cases was animals, if you remember. So how do we configure the program management module to work in those cases? So the client, the contact, is not served, right? In this case, the animal is what is served. And if you see on the little chart, here's our standard chart, right, with the blue and the green, and the purple would be a custom object that we would build. That would be the animal object that's receiving the benefits. In this case, I think we talked about helping the homeless population meet the needs of their pets, right? And so the animal would be actually in the program engagement. They would be receiving the service delivery. So the configuration needs to be updated so that the field is a lookup field, right? Such as the animal on the program engagement and the service delivery. And otherwise, you're not going to get that relationship that you need between the program management module itself and the custom object. So you want to be able to relate those objects appropriately so that you can track engagement there. So that's one customizable configuration for you. An additional one, there are 2 process builders, and yes, I know we're supposed to be migrating to Flow now. Maybe that's a fun task we'll take on coming soon, migrating all these things to Flow. But right now they're contained in the process builders that actually come with the program management module. However, they're not activated. So you can activate the program engagement object and the service delivery object, right? It updates the name as part of the program engagement object process builder, and you can edit it by cloning the process builder and making the necessary adjustments. Depending on the use case, you may want to remove anonymous from the auto naming process and replace it with an account name or a custom object such as animals and its name. Check out the processes, update them as needed. There are some dynamic formulas, but the standard formula that I can share with you offline. It's just a lot of, if, then, all that good stuff that you can study in the formula building applications in Trailhead. But these processes actually automate a little bit more some of the things that you need, so you don't have to do that on a regular basis. So attendance and the most recent date of service to a client are contained in roll-up fields. and they're automatically calculated on the contact, on the program engagement, on the service, and on the service session objects. However, the program management module does require an initial setup for these automations so that they work as expected. So there are lots of words on this slide, but it's a good checklist for you. And again, not to read them all, but to let you know that the three basic important parts of this are the triggers that you need to activate under custom metadata types, the summary fields that you need to make sure the apex is set, the classes are compiled, and then attendance statuses, which I actually did on the next page so we could see a little bit better, which is one of the most important information on tracking what is going on in your service deliveries. So you want to make sure that you have those set up appropriately as well. So they're in the custom metadata types and that it rolls up into that bucketed value for you. So you don't have to create that customizable roll-up already. By default, the attendance statuses are present, excused absence, and unexcused absence. If that gives you flashbacks to high school, I understand. It's always like, we got to have a note, got to have a note. But you can add additional statuses if needed. Sometimes you may need an invited status. Perhaps you want to track who all is invited, but then who actually shows up, right? So again, a good way to look at this and be able to address those additional steps that you have in attendance statuses. It also makes a really nice path on your interface so that you can see who's attended, who hasn't, who's invited, etc. So this is just the configuration of all that work. It's super simple once you've done all the work that we started out with to identify how a customer or an internal customer is going to use the program management module. Now you're just setting it up to reflect what you've already learned. You can also set up case management for Nonprofit Success Pack, but it's a paid add-on and an extension of the program management module. So, so far I have not seen it used significantly, but there are additional instructions once you purchase that paid case management. So with the limited time that we have, let's go on to something that's used a lot more often, and that's Volunteers for Salesforce. And of course, it has the great acronym V4S there. And just a reminder, as we explore these configurations that are available, let's review the underlying data structure, right? So again, leads, campaigns, and contacts in this case are the standard objects in Salesforce that are used in Volunteers for Salesforce. Volunteers for Salesforce adds volunteer jobs, volunteer shifts, volunteer hours, job recurrence schedules, and volunteer recurrence schedules. So there are 4 important configurations you want to look at for Volunteers for Salesforce. And volunteer skills is one of them. So that's an important part of matching the right volunteer with the right job and matching those volunteers to the right time slot, right, is also important. So volunteer skills are actually pick list values in the contact and lead objects. And so you can add new skills from which to choose. It's as easy as updating those 2 fields. Also, you might think that updating the availability fields is a good plan, but it's really not. In the next section, we'll talk about how that recurring schedule relies on availability values just as they are. So just say no to changing them. Automating recurring jobs and volunteers. So some volunteer jobs happen on a repeated basis with repeat volunteers. How can you automatically create those recurring jobs without creating each shift individually? Again, you can use your Salesforce administrator skills to go to Setup, Apex Classes, and click Schedule Apex. Give the job a descriptive name and choose Volunteer Batch Recurrence for the Apex class. Running this job once a week is the best practice. And by creating this scheduled job, the system automatically does the work for you up to 4 months into the future. That's the standard built-in configuration that's actually in the documentation for Volunteers for Salesforce. You might also consider, in the day and age of flow, creating your own flow to make that happen. It's also an option. There's always more than one way to solve a problem in Salesforce. Notifying volunteers, and this is a key and critical part, right? Because if the volunteer doesn't get a confirmation that they've signed up for something, they may not remember to attend. So Volunteers for Salesforce provides an out-of-the-box email template for most used volunteer communications. So things like reminders, notifications, thank you emails. If you go to Setup and Email Templates, you can select the templates that you want to make available to use. You can edit the text, you can turn the email off entirely. And so while you're thinking about communications, you want to be sure that you've set the organization-wide email address and that the brand consistency is there, right? Does your letterhead need to be updated in Salesforce for that email template? And then the most important part, especially for the standpoint of adoption, is configuring Volunteers for Salesforce to make it super easy for the staff to use. So Volunteers for Salesforce actually makes use of field sets to more closely align with the organization's use case and business processes. So the volunteer wizard page, the mass edit volunteer hours page, and the find volunteers page, I'm sorry. You should address all of those layouts and who they're assigned to and what is actually on those layouts that your folks will need to make it a super simple, easy job to set up volunteer shifts for volunteers to sign up for. So Volunteers for Salesforce is one of the older parts of Nonprofit Cloud, and it is highly customizable and very useful. The two reminders that I would give you are that it's not mobile responsive. So when you create that code to put into your WordPress site or whatever external site you're using, it is not mobile responsive, so it makes it difficult to use sometimes. But just be aware of the limitations. It's a great free product for its use case. And now to probably my least favorite, probably the most important and my least favorite part of any implementation. Part of the discovery discussions from the class we did, is change difficult for your organization, should encompass the security model. And that includes profiles and how they are assigned, sharing rules, permission sets. But wait, there is so much more. In fact, from a security standpoint, I think there is an entire new certification. If it's not out already, it's coming soon on security itself. So let's talk about the things that we as a Salesforce admin or a Salesforce consultant can help with. Multi-factor authentication. If you haven't run into it yet, you will. Salesforce has actually made it relatively easy to implement with this assistant built right into Setup. And multi-factor means that users prove their identity in multiple ways. So they have to have a username and password, plus it has to be authenticated in some way. And generally that's an authenticator app. Salesforce has their own, you can use LastPass, you can use, there's another one that I'm forgetting off the top of my head. But if you haven't already done some study on this, you should, because it's important that the data in your instance be secure, especially if you're working with nonprofits who deal with highly personal data, medical data, those sorts of things. You'll want to be sure and implement this from the get-go, and then nobody's complaining that it's so hard to log in now. A second thing you really need to look at is how many system admins do you really need? I don't want to tell you all how many organizations I'm aware of that have 10 Power of Us licenses, and every single one of them is a system admin. It's horrible. Kathy, don't tell how many we know of those. And the Salesforce administrator has all the superpowers, right? So the system administrator profile should only be assigned to trained Salesforce users. Depending on the size of the organization and the business use case, there may be more than one, but best practices stipulate reserving the system administrator profile for those users who set up, configure, and maintain the Salesforce system. It's never helpful for every user to have the system admin profile. In fact, there is a formula that is loose, and I want to say maybe it's, well, I'm not going to tell you because I'm going to tell you wrong, but there are huge organizations that may only have 2 system administrators who have full system admin power. So again, change management is hard, right? And if they've already gotten the 10 Power of Us licenses and they're all system admins, it can be a real effort in change management to take those privileges away from the folks that don't really need them. So a good thought process for you all. Of course, it also is incredibly frustrating when one system admin does something and then another system admin does something that undoes what the other system admin did. Not a good use of time and energy either. So realize how many system admins you have and make sure that they're really needed. So 2 important best practices around users who are no longer a part of your organization. First and foremost, deactivate their Salesforce account. That's not going to do or change anything in your org whatsoever, but deactivate them. Turn off their privileges. If they leave, that should be the first thing that happens. Do not delete their record, right? Hang on to it. Migrate the ownership of the records to an active user in your Salesforce instance, right? Migrate those away from the person who's no longer there to an active user. And leaving records to be owned by inactive users can cause your applications to stop working as you expect. A lot of problems involved in that. There are a lot of additional ways to encourage data integrity and secure your data in Salesforce. Data privacy laws in your area may affect how you set up security. For example, in the European Union, the laws are different there than they are in the US. California has adopted data security laws, data privacy laws that you may want to take into consideration. So be aware, even from third-party vendors, if you are installing a third-party application into Nonprofit Cloud, be sure to ask what their privacy setups are. So you can also work with field encryption, field history tracking, and paid features such as Salesforce Shield to better protect your data. Like I say, that's a whole, security is becoming more and more of an entity unto itself. And we probably could never study enough to know everything there is to know about security. But these are the basics that you'll want to implement for any nonprofit cloud implementation. So we've configured program management module and volunteers for Salesforce. We've looked at the customizable standard options for those applications. We've also looked at some of the important best practices for data integrity and security. As with all Salesforce tools, there are many new options and updates made in every release to better configure and customize applications to better suit business processes and use cases. This chapter has also illustrated how important a Salesforce administrator's knowledge of standard Salesforce functionality is to configuring profiles, permissions, sharing rules, and streamlining the user interface for the best results. So next up is declarative tools and modules. And this will also require your Salesforce administrator skills to understand the options for customizable rollups, for matching gifts, and the open source commons outbound funds module. So that's all coming up next week. And Kathy, I know you've got homework and lab hours. Do you want to speak to those?
Sorry, I apparently can never find the mute button. Yeah, it's a mixture of working with the program management module and the security. So there's a lot of the security related trailhead in there. Always a good resource is the Who Sees What videos. Also a good thing to share with your colleagues. Just, especially if you want to switch away from everybody being a system admin, it's a good set of videos to give them the idea of why you're saying what you're trying to say. And then chapter 12 is for next week, and office hours is Thursday at 1 p.m. Eastern. And when we have the video ready, we'll add it on and post it and send out the email with all the details.
Awesome. And we will see you next week. Let's stop the recording.